Welcome to the lands of science fiction stories. I wish you a pleasant listening experience.
Admiral Ken Valen stood motionless in front of the expansive viewport of Sol Sentinel, the massive orbital station that floated above Earth like a vigilant guardian. His dark eyes reflected the brilliant blue and white of the planet below, a sight that still managed to strike awe into him even after years of service. But today, awe was tempered by something far more pressing: uncertainty. His fingers curled lightly around the datapad in his hand, the message glaring up at him like an ominous premonition. The Galrac Imperium, notorious for their strict hierarchical society and disdain for unpredictability, had sent a diplomatic delegation, their warships now drifting ominously near the outer edges of the solar system. "Admiral," a voice called through the comms. "The Galrac fleet will be within hailing range in 5 minutes. Shall I prepare the welcoming party?" Valen took a deep breath, his jaw tightening. The Galrac weren't known for peaceful diplomacy. Their obsession with order and control clashed violently with humanity's wild, chaotic nature. But Earth had drawn their attention, and not in a good way. "Yes," Valen replied, his voice calm but firm. "Prepare the delegation, but ensure our security measures remain on high alert." As he turned to leave the observation deck, his mind raced through the implications of this encounter. The Galrac were coming to negotiate, but their presence was far more likely a show of force. After all, they considered humanity's rapid expansion into the stars a threat, an uncontrollable, dangerous species that disrupted the carefully maintained balance of the galaxy. The doors to the command center slid open with a quiet hiss as Admiral Valen entered, greeted by the familiar sight of officers rushing to finalize preparations. Commander Lauren Denar, Valen's trusted second-in-command, approached with a stern look, datapad in hand. "The Galrac fleet is led by none other than High General Zorak herself," Denar said, his voice low and filled with trepidation. "This isn't a routine diplomatic mission, Admiral. Zorak is known for breaking planets that fall out of line." Valen nodded grimly. "They're here to teach us a lesson, make an example of humanity." Denar's expression faltered for a moment. "Are we prepared for that?" A rare smirk played on Valen's lips, though there was no humor behind it. "Prepared? But since when has humanity ever done things by the book? We'll improvise." "That's what I'm afraid of," Denar muttered before returning to his station. The command center buzzed with tension, the minutes ticking down until the Galrac warships would reach communication range. Valen glanced up at the massive holographic display, watching the blips of the alien ships creep closer. Finally, the moment came. The screen flickered to life, revealing the cold, imposing figure of High General Zorak, a being covered in sleek, black exoskeletal armor adorned with ceremonial engravings of past conquests. Her 4 compound eyes fixed on the screen, exuding an aura of dominance. "This is High General Zorak of the Galrac Imperium," she announced, her voice resonating with cold authority. "We are here to address the chaos your species has brought upon the galaxy." Admiral Valen stepped forward, meeting her gaze with unwavering confidence. "I am Admiral Ken Valen of the Terran Defense Force. On behalf of humanity, I welcome you to the Sol system. We are prepared to discuss your concerns, but I assure you, our intentions are peaceful." Zorak's mandibles clicked together, the sound almost dismissive. "Peaceful? Your reckless expansion into unclaimed sectors, your disregard for galactic order, your insatiable curiosity without thought for consequence. These are not the actions of a peaceful species. You are a threat to stability." Valen raised an eyebrow, his expression one of barely concealed amusement. "I wasn't aware progress was considered a crime in the galaxy, High General." Zorak's eyes narrowed, but before she could respond, Valen pressed on. "Perhaps we should meet in person to discuss these matters. We've prepared a neutral location on Earth's surface. Central Park. It's quite scenic." The suggestion hung in the air for a moment as Zorak conferred with her subordinates, their antennae twitching in what could only be interpreted as a cautious huddle. Finally, Zorak turned back to the screen. "Very well, Admiral. We will attend this meeting, but know this: any sign of treachery will be met with swift and overwhelming retribution." As the transmission cut off, Valen let out a slow breath. Denar approached, his brow furrowed with concern. You're taking them to Central Park? A public space filled with civilians? Are you sure that's wise? Valen glanced at his second-in-command, a sly smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. Trust me, Commander. There's no better place to show them what humanity is truly made of. The day was bright and warm, the perfect backdrop for the unfolding of one of the most bizarre diplomatic encounters in human history. Admiral Valen stood at the meeting point, flanked by a small group of diplomats and military personnel. Central Park was bustling with its usual activity: children playing, families picnicking, joggers weaving through the crowds. All blissfully unaware of the alien delegation descending upon their world. High General Zorak's shuttle touched down, her black-armored figure emerging with a squad of Galrak guards, all bristling with weapons and suspicion. The general moved with precision, her compound eyes scanning the scene with a mixture of wariness and disgust. Valen stepped forward, hand outstretched in a universal gesture of greeting. Welcome to Earth, High General. Zorak stared at his hand as if it were an offensive weapon, before reluctantly extending one of her upper limbs to shake. The gesture was as stiff as it was forced. Let us begin, Zorak intoned, her voice icy. Explain how your species justifies its reckless behavior. Valen grinned, motioning to the lively park around them. We believe actions speak louder than words, General. Perhaps you'd like to observe the very essence of humanity in action. Before Zorak could respond, a group of children darted past, laughing and screaming in the throes of an intense game of tag. The Galrak guards immediately snapped to attention, weapons raised, forming a protective circle around their leader. Zorak herself recoiled, her mandibles clattering in alarm. What is the meaning of this? Zorak demanded, her exoskeleton flushing an angry red. Is this some kind of attack? Valen barely suppressed a laugh. Attack? General, they're just playing. It's a game, harmless fun. Zorak's gaze shifted to the children, her antennae twitching in what could only be confusion. Play? You allow your young to engage in such chaotic behavior. Valen's grin widened as he gestured toward the park, filled with the sounds of human joy. It's how we learn, General. To adapt, to take risks, and to grow. It's in our nature. Zorak stared at the scene, her compound eyes blinking in bewilderment. And so, the conversation began, an alien general, for the first time, confronting the paradox that was humanity, a species that thrived on chaos, danger, and play. High General Zorak struggled to maintain her composure as she observed the pandemonium before her. The children, their small human forms darting unpredictably between swings and slides, appeared to be on the verge of self-destruction at any given moment. Every step they took, every tumble and fall, filled the general with an ever-growing sense of dread. Her Galrak guards were equally unsettled, their eyes darting nervously as they watched for potential disasters. Admiral Can Valen stood at her side, arms crossed, a look of casual amusement on his face. You seem uneasy, General. Zorak's mandibles clicked together, her irritation palpable. This is madness, Admiral. Allowing your young to engage in such reckless, unsupervised behavior. It is irresponsible. How do you maintain control? Valen chuckled softly. Control? Humanity doesn't thrive on control, General. We thrive on adaptation. We allow our young to take risks because it teaches them how to overcome challenges. Every scrape, every fall, it's a lesson in resilience. Zorak's exoskeleton bristled with barely concealed disgust. Her society, the Galrak Imperium, was built on rigid structure and predictability. Their young were raised in carefully controlled environments, their every action monitored and guided. The thought of allowing children to navigate a world of uncertainty on their own was unthinkable. As if to emphasize Valen's point, a young boy suddenly shrieked as he fell from a jungle gym, landing with a thud on the ground. The Galrak guards tensed, their weapons half-raised, expecting a full-scale emergency to unfold. But instead of cries of panic, the boy simply sat up, rubbing his elbow with a frown. After a brief moment of contemplation, he stood, wiped his tears away, and promptly resumed climbing, more determined than before. Incredible, Zorak muttered, her compound eyes tracking the boy's progress. They do not fear injury? Valen's grin widened. We don't fear failure, General. We embrace it. Failure is the greatest teacher. The more we fall, the more we learn to rise. Zorak's mandibles clicked in thought, her antennae twitching as she processed this new information. But the potential for harm. Of course, there's risk, Valen said with a shrug. But that's life, isn't it? Everything we do comes with risk. It's how we manage that risk that defines us. A faint buzzing noise interrupted the conversation. One of Zorak's officers, a tall figure with an iridescent exoskeleton, stepped forward and saluted sharply. Hi General, our scans show that several of these activities have a statistically high likelihood of causing physical harm to the young. Shall we intervene? Zorak glanced at the officer, then at Valen, who merely raised an eyebrow in challenge. For a moment, the general seemed torn, but she eventually shook her head. No, Commander. Let them continue. I wish to observe. The officer hesitated, his mandibles twitching with uncertainty, but obeyed nonetheless. Valen gave Zorak an approving nod. You might learn something from this, General. The group moved further into the park, following Valen's lead as he guided them toward the playground's central area. The noise of children laughing, shouting, and running filled the air, a cacophony of chaos that seemed to only grow in intensity. Zorak couldn't help but feel as though she was standing at the edge of a battlefield, where the rules of engagement were incomprehensible. As they approached a large slide, Valen stopped and turned to face the Galrak delegation. General, tell me, in your society, how are young Galrak trained? I imagine they don't have much room for experimentation. Zorak straightened, her voice taking on a more formal tone. Our young are raised in designated learning centers, where every aspect of their education is meticulously planned and monitored. They are taught discipline, efficiency, and order from the moment they hatch. There is no room for chaos. Valen nodded thoughtfully. And what happens when they encounter something unexpected? Something outside of those carefully controlled environments? For the first time, Zorak hesitated. Unexpected situations are rare. But when they occur, we have protocols in place to ensure stability. Protocols, Valen repeated with a smirk. Well, in our case, unexpected situations are the norm. Chaos is inevitable. The only way to deal with it is to be adaptable. Zorak's compound eyes narrowed. You believe that this chaos gives you strength? Absolutely, Valen replied without hesitation. We don't seek to eliminate chaos. We learn to navigate it. It's why humanity has survived on a world that should have destroyed us long ago. Zorak glanced around the park, her mind racing as she tried to reconcile the strange behavior of these humans with her own deeply ingrained beliefs. Could it be that their unpredictability, their willingness to embrace danger, was what made them so formidable? Before she could ponder further, a loud cheer erupted from a group of children nearby. They had gathered around a large, multicolored structure with spinning platforms and towering slides. One of the children, a small girl with pigtails, had just reached the top of the highest slide, her arms raised triumphantly in the air. Watch this, she shouted to her friends before flinging herself down the slide with reckless abandon. Zorak flinched as the girl shot down the steep incline, the speed and lack of control setting off alarms in her mind. But rather than crashing at the bottom, the girl landed with a joyous shout, laughing as she tumbled into the soft ground. Valen turned to Zorak, his expression unreadable. Care to give it a try, General? The Galrak leader stiffened, her mandibles clicking in shock. What? The slide, Valen said, gesturing toward the structure. You wanted to understand humanity, didn't you? There's no better way than to experience it firsthand. Zorak's guards exchanged nervous glances, clearly uncomfortable with the idea of their leader engaging in such a bizarre, undignified activity. But Valen's challenge hung in the air, daring her to step outside her rigid comfort zone. For a long moment, Zorak stood frozen, her mind warring with itself. Her pride told her to refuse, to maintain her authority. But something deeper, something she couldn't quite explain, urged her to accept. Finally, with a sharp click of her mandibles, she stepped forward. Very well, Admiral. In the interest of understanding, I will attempt this human activity. Valen's grin widened as he motioned for her to follow. This way, General. The Galrak delegation watched in stunned silence as Zorak, the feared and respected High General of the Imperium, carefully climbed the ladder of the slide, her movements stiff and uncertain. At the top, she paused, glancing down at the long, twisting slide before her. Just push off, Valen called from below. And don't forget to have fun. Zorak's antennae twitched with discomfort, but she couldn't back down now. With a deep breath, she pushed herself forward. Her descent was anything but graceful. Limbs flailed, and undignified sounds escaped her as she hurtled down the slide. But when she reached the bottom, something unexpected happened. She laughed. It was a strange sound, an awkward, stuttering noise that caught the Galrak delegation off guard. But it was unmistakably laughter. Valen clapped his hands in mock applause. Well done, General. Looks like you survived your first encounter with human chaos. Zorak stood, brushing herself off with as much dignity as she could muster, her exoskeleton flushed a deep shade of blue. That was invigorating, she admitted, her voice soft with surprise. Perhaps there is merit in this chaos. Valen's eyes gleamed with satisfaction. That's the spirit. Welcome to humanity's greatest secret weapon, General, fun. As Zorak glanced around the park, watching human children continue their chaotic games, a new understanding began to take root. This species, with its reckless nature and refusal to adhere to strict order, was far more resilient than she had ever imagined. And perhaps, just perhaps, there was something to be learned from them after all. High General Zorak stood in silence, the distant sounds of children playing fading into the background as her mind churned with newfound revelations. The humans, with their unpredictable behavior and apparent disregard for safety, had shown her something far more profound than she had ever expected. There was strength in their chaos, a strength that she had been too rigid to comprehend until now. Admiral Can Valen watched her quietly, his arms still crossed as a soft breeze blew through the park. He could see the internal conflict playing out behind Zorak's compound eyes, the rigid beliefs of the Galrak Imperium being challenged for the first time. It was the exact outcome he had hoped for when he suggested the meeting in Central Park, though even he hadn't anticipated how quickly the lesson would be absorbed. Finally, Zorak turned to face him, her mandibles clicking together in a thoughtful rhythm. You humans are not as chaotic as you first appear, Admiral. You claim to embrace chaos, yet there is a method to your madness. It is unsettling. Valen smiled, giving a casual shrug. We don't embrace chaos for its own sake, General. We embrace the potential that lies within it. Chaos is the birthplace of innovation, of adaptability. It forces us to think on our feet, to grow stronger, to find new ways to overcome challenges. Zorak let out a low hum, her eyes scanning the park once more. She watched as a young girl leaped from a tree, tumbling into the grass with a laugh, her friends following close behind. Despite the constant dangers that seemed to surround them, the children never hesitated. They were fearless in the face of uncertainty. You raise your young in a crucible of unpredictability, Zorak said quietly, and they emerge stronger because of it. Valen nodded, his expression softening. Exactly. It's how we've survived, how we've thrived. Earth is a dangerous place. From the moment we are born, we're taught that nothing is certain, that nothing is safe. But instead of trying to control every aspect of our environment, we learn to adapt to it. Zorak's antennae twitched as she processed his words. This is adaptability, she began slowly. It is what makes your species so difficult to control. You cannot be contained within the rigid structures of the galaxy's established order. That's right, Valen replied. We're unpredictable, and that scares a lot of other species. But it's also what makes us valuable. We see opportunities where others see obstacles. We take risks that others wouldn't dream of. And we learn from our failures. The general's exoskeleton shifted in a way that Valen could only interpret as contemplation. After a long pause, Zorak let out a soft sigh. I have misjudged your people, Admiral. I believed that your chaotic nature was a threat to stability, but now I see that it is the very thing that ensures your survival. Valen smiled, offering her a respectful nod. We don't expect everyone to understand us, General. but we do appreciate when someone is willing to try. Zorak's gaze shifted back to her guards, who still stood in stiff formation, their weapons at the ready. She could see the confusion in their eyes, the uncertainty that mirrored her own. They had come to Earth expecting to find a species in need of correction, of discipline. Instead, they had found a people who thrived in the very chaos they had been taught to fear. "I will return to the Imperium with new insights," Zorak said at last, her voice firm but contemplative. "Perhaps it is time we re-evaluate our rigid structures. There is much we could learn from your species, Admiral. Much that we have overlooked." Valen raised an eyebrow, his smile widening slightly. "Well, General, that's a conversation I'd be happy to continue over a cup of coffee. I hear it's becoming quite popular with your delegation." Zorak tilted her head, her mandibles clicking in what could only be described as amusement. "Indeed. Your coffee has become a topic of great interest among my officers. Though I must admit, it has a rather unpredictable effect on our physiology." Valen chuckled. "That sounds about right. Coffee's a chaotic little drink too." For the first time since they had met, Zorak allowed herself a small, tentative smile. It was a strange expression for her species, but Valen could see the sincerity behind it. The rigid walls of Galrak tradition were beginning to crack, if only just a little. "Very well, Admiral," Zorak said, her voice taking on a more formal tone once more. "We will discuss this further. But for now, I believe I have seen enough to take back to my people. Perhaps this encounter will be the beginning of a new understanding between our species." Valen nodded, extending his hand once more. "To new understandings, General." Zorak hesitated only briefly this time before taking his hand in a firm grip. The shake was awkward, but there was no longer any disdain in her movements, only respect. As Zorak turned to leave, her guards falling into step behind her, Valen watched her go with a sense of satisfaction. The Galrak Imperium was not known for changing its ways easily, but today had been a step in the right direction. Humanity's unpredictability, its resilience, had made an impact. And perhaps that was the greatest victory of all. Before Zorak boarded her shuttle, she paused and glanced back at the park one last time. The children were still playing, their laughter and shouts filling the air with a chaotic joy that she had once found incomprehensible. Now, she saw it for what it truly was, a testament to the strength that lay in the heart of unpredictability. "Admiral," Zorak called out, her voice carrying across the distance. "Tell your people, we will not underestimate you again." Valen smiled, giving her a respectful nod. "I'll hold you to that, General." The shuttle doors closed with a quiet hiss, and as the Galrak vessel lifted off into the sky, Valen stood there, hands on his hips, watching the bright trail of exhaust fade into the distance. Commander Denar approached from behind, his expression a mixture of relief and surprise. "That went better than expected, sir." Valen chuckled, shaking his head. "It always does when you let them see what really makes us human." Denar raised an eyebrow. "And what's that?" Valen glanced around the park, at the children who had no idea that their games had just changed the course of interstellar politics. "Our willingness to embrace the unknown. To take risks. To laugh in the face of danger." Denar smirked. "Sounds like chaos to me." "Exactly," Valen said with a grin. "And that's exactly why they'll never be able to beat us." As the sun began to set over Central Park, Admiral Can Valen turned and walked back toward the command shuttle, his heart light with the knowledge that today, humanity had earned a new kind of respect from an old enemy. And somewhere, far above the Earth, an alien general was rethinking everything she had ever known. The end.